I'm Aryeh Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. We are back with WNBA Stocks, where Owen Pence and I check the market in the W as of today, August 15th. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. That's patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. Are you in market for a WNBA playoff game and you want to go to a game? Well, do we have the sponsorship for you? Thanks to our sponsor, TickPick, you don't have to worry. The original no-fee ticketing site and official ticketing partner of still the defending WNBA champion, Chicago Sky. Use the link tickpick.com/Winsidr. That's tickpick.com/Winsidr for your upcoming ticket purchases for the WNBA, NFL, NBA, or literally any other event. We're back with WNBA Stocks, where we check a pulse on the market. As of today, August 15th, Owen, the playoffs are here. It's exciting time. It's a depressing time for some people. It's a really depressing time when you think about the greatest center of all time no longer lacing them up. I guess before we hop in, immediate thoughts as of August 15th.
Yeah, it was tough watching, Sill's final game yesterday. Very emotional. It's one of those weird situations where you don't know whether it's going to be her final game. They have a shot at making the playoffs and they start to make that surge late in the game. You're like, "Oh, could it be? This would be, storybook stuff." I thought it was beautiful that, she got a double-double in her final game. I thought that her breaking the 4,000 rebound mark in her final game is truly some Hollywood type of stuff. And just seeing the hugs, the embraces was very, bittersweet, beautiful to see just how universally beloved she is, but also, from a selfish perspective, knowing that we're not going to watch her be able to play basketball again. It was tough. The hug with Reeve, it got a little misty in my living room. But looking on the bright side, like these playoffs are shaping up pretty wonderfully. We've got some incredibly intriguing first round matchups. I can't believe the regular season's already over. It feels like a week ago that we had started this podcast, and we're talking about how hot the fever were out the gate, all this and that. But I can't wait for what's to come here over the next month.
Me too. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a little bit of a different WNBA stocks than we're used to, because obviously, this is an intense market, right? The I don't know, the exchange is closing in a few weeks. So you get all your trades in, get all your stocks in. Last time we'll do this for the season as we close, because we've closed out the regular season. We're into the playoffs. I'll give you a little rundown of what we've done last week. After that, no more talking about the regular season. It's all playoffs from here on out. 7 weeks ago, New York and Seattle were up, and Dallas and Atlanta down. 6 weeks ago, Chicago, Minnesota up, Phoenix and Las Vegas down. 5 weeks ago, New York and LA up, Indy and Seattle down. 4 weeks ago, Atlanta and Minnesota down, Vegas and New York up. New York 3 weeks ago with Minnesota were down, and Connecticut and Phoenix are up. 2 weeks ago, Atlanta and LA down, and then Dallas and DC up. And last week, Minnesota and Dallas were up, and DC and Indy were down. Owen, let's just get down out of the way, right? Like,
Let's do it. We'll go downer first. We'll save the best for last. We got, because this makes sense too in terms of tying a bow on the regular season. Like, this is the final time we're going to talk about these teams that did not make the playoffs. And so our two down stocks this week are two teams who were in playoff contention for quite a while into the last week of the season and did not end up making it. And my down stock is the Los Angeles Sparks, who I believe to be kind of the team who has the most work to do from a PR standpoint after this season. Like they had a nightmare of a year, And where do they go from here is a very perplexing question, one that is very difficult to answer. So I think what we have to start with is the fact that this team was expected to make the playoffs. When you looked at who they signed in the offseason, the addition of Liz Cambage, the fact that Kennedy Carter had entered the Los Angeles market, and they made some good signings around the edges. It looked like a team that was going to be competitive. It looked like a team that could swing pretty far in either direction in terms of like contending or in terms of it being a disaster. And of course, here we are, and it was a disaster. The biggest thing here is that Derek Fisher left this team in shambles. I mean, it's fairly remarkable and pretty depressing if you're a fan of the league. This storied franchise just really being in a really difficult spot right now, because this was, by all indications, by record, by point differential, by net rating, just about every advanced statistic you want to use, the Sparks were the second worst team in the league this year. Indiana, obviously the worst, but they were not trying to compete. The other 11 teams who were trying to compete, Los Angeles was the worst, and it's fairly definitive. Now, that wouldn't be a disaster if they hadn't traded their first round pick. But Derek Fisher, former head coach, former GM of the Los Angeles Sparks, traded this year's first round pick for Kennedy Carter. And, Kennedy Carter was worth a gamble on, and I believe she's going to have a very bright future in the league. I believe that she's gotten the short end of the stick in many regards, and really had a great attitude this year, in another situation, going from Atlanta last year, which was last year's dumpster fire, to this year's dumpster fire. She really had a great attitude, didn't sulk, played well late in the season when her number was called. There's a couple other people who played really well. Nneka Ogwumike, MVP candidate for a lot of the season, was carrying this team on her shoulders. Brittany Sykes had an all defensive year, as she normally does, and showed real strides on the offensive end. You could argue that Katie Lou Samuelson had her best WNBA season. There's reasons for optimism, but overall, the fact that they were not competitive, did not make the playoffs, and have no pick in this year's draft, in addition to the fact that many of basically their entire roster are impending free agents, it leaves you wondering if it was all worth it to put all your chips behind Derek Fisher, because look where it has left you. It left you with Amanda Zahui B not even playing this year because they decided to sign Liz Cambage instead. She leaves in the middle of the season. It was just a really, really tough look for the team in a lot of regards. And they need a reset. So, we're tying a bow on the season, but it's kind of hard to overstate how messy things got for this team this year. Just a really, really rough season for the Sparks.
Oh yeah, you've said it perfectly. And hey, look, I love to play devil's advocate, so I'm gonna top it off. You hit off all the points. I'll say the one positive is in the exit interviews, Nneka said she wants to come back. If that holds true for the rest of the offseason, hey, maybe you can do what you should have done in the first place, which is build a team around Nneka, build a team around your MVP, just get a bunch of shooters, throw them around Nneka, and let's ball out. Completely agree with everything you said. Embarrassing season for both of our down teams. I guess I would say that this down and up is essentially a season cap, right? Like this was a down season for both these franchises. But the one positive for LA is they're in a situation where, yeah, they took a big gamble. They put all the chips in. They lost. But now you can rebuild and start from scratch, essentially. So really just rough season, blowouts to end it. Interim coaches, making statements of do not plays for certain players. Just a laundry list of issues for the LA Sparks. But you know what? You can look forward. It's LA. They're going to be a top area for free agents to want to go to and join the team, as long as they can get a competent head coach, and they can probably pull for a top star head coach also, just because it's LA. But it's really going to come down to the ownership, and is ownership going to invest in this team? people often think, oh, LA, they must be connected to the Lakers. They're not. Oh, they must be connected to the Clippers. They're not. Like, the ownership needs to step up and invest in this team and put their money where their mouth is. They need a real practice facility. They need a lot of other stuff. But look, can go up. It can go up from here. The other down team this season, you maybe guessed, you maybe thunk it, you maybe thought it, the Minnesota Lynx. We talked about it a little bit to start, just, emotional last week and a half specifically for the Lynx, a team that showed at times that they were playing together, and to steal a phrase that was on a repeat during the end of season press conference with Cheryl Reeve, was just the buy-in. When the team bought in for certain games, we saw them play really well and beat Chicago and beat Vegas and look competent against top teams in this league. Too often their defense was non-existent, and they would appear for one quarter, make a big push, and then disappear for the rest of the game. There's lots of questions for this team moving forward. No more Sylvia Fowles. Powers has a big paycheck coming. Chanwa still has a big paycheck. McBride has a big paycheck. And besides that, a lot of availability. You have Fee coming back. Hopefully, according to the exit interview, she's not going overseas. Give her some time to get back to 100. And look, Fee's an MVP caliber player. It's now about, and you also, yes, you have that huge gap that Sill's going to leave, but that also brings in a huge amount of money that they can use this offseason to possibly bring in a big player. Look, end of the day, an 11 season playoff streak drought or playoff streak ends. It's a tough end for the Minnesota Lynx, and look, they struggled throughout. But look, again, rebuild. That, I guess it's down but not out, right? Because I guess they are out. I don't know. Owen, take over from here.
No, I hear what you're saying. I don't think that I'm going to be as doom and gloom on Minnesota. But I completely get everything you're saying. Here's my issue with their season. And Coach Reeves today in the exit interviews did mention the defensive element. They were 10th this year in defensive rating. They were not good enough defensively, and she mentioned the buy-in. And I think what I took away from that, or my reaction to that, was, how do you buy in to a season when it doesn't feel like the GM, who also happens to be Coach Reeve, has bought in? And I say this, Coach, if you're listening, I think you're the greatest coach in the history of the league. I'm simply judging on a season by season basis, and
Well, and
I also
I just want to add one thing, Owen, and I think this is completely fair. Of like, look, players have good seasons, right, and then have seasons where they aren't playing their best, right? Coaches and GMs, you can be the greatest of all time. It doesn't mean you're going to be MVP every season, right? Like, you're not going to always have the best season and be the best out there. And I agree with what you're saying so far. Sorry.
100%, and she is 1,000% the coach, the GM I'd want going forward for this team, and this is why I'm not that doom and gloom on them. Is that ultimately Nafisa Collier missed basically the entire season. It's a remarkable feat that she was able to return when she did for the final few games. Major props to her for that. But ultimately, when your best in your prime player is missing the entire season, it's going to be a lost season. Like, that's just the fact of the matter. And so I think that the fact that this team now is at the bottom of the lottery, but is going to have a good draft pick, has another draft pick this year, at the tail end of the first round. And, like you said, they have some flexibility. They have the core piece, Nafisa Collier. They have some other, players who I really, really like. I just don't think that the long-term forecast for this team is bad by any means. And Reeve is a brilliant basketball mind, the person I want leading this team. But back to her comments today, it's just kind of like, okay, if you enter the season without a point guard, if you don't re-sign Lasia Clarendon, if you let Crystal Dangerfield walk, and then you enter the season and immediately start losing games in which, a point guard such as Mariah Jefferson, who came in and kind of rescued this team, maybe a third of the way through the season, if they start the year with a point guard, they probably make the playoffs. Like, that is probably the difference. And so, sure, you can say, that the team didn't buy in defensively on a consistent basis, and I think that's totally accurate. But from my perspective, I kind of have to point at the roster construction and say, well, it's hard to buy in if you don't feel that the team was given enough pieces to succeed in the first place. So
Well,
that's my overall takeaway. But ultimately, look, they battled till the final day of the season. Still got her flowers. Led the league in rebounds in her final year. I mean, just all kinds of great stuff. I just don't think that it's like a real disaster of a season in the way that it was for Los Angeles. But I can see why the stock would be down for sure.
yeah, and I would agree with that. It definitely isn't the same realm, right? We saw a fight. We saw this team come together at certain points. I think for me, it's the bigger thing is, you know, all right, you watch the press conference or whatever, and there was a comment that Reeve had. I stand by all my my roster moves, blah blah blah. Heading or I think heading into training camp or whatever the exact quote is. For me, it boils down to this: this is not, a dumpster fire. Shout out to the Dallas Wings PR or social media account. This is not the dumpster fire that LA is going through right now. What it is though is it needs to be a gut check, self check moment, right? Like Reeve needs to look in the mirror and honestly evaluate what happened this last season, what went wrong, and now that you no longer have the greatest true big and the greatest big of all time in league history, you need to start evaluating, okay, what's the style of play that is best to build around Nafisa Collier and make the moves that are appropriate to that. Bluntly said, like, obviously, I wasn't going to talk about Minnesota, not talk about Milic. Like, I understand there was a lot more money sunk into Achanwa. Her play does not deserve that. Her play did not show that at any point during the 2 seasons that she's been with Minnesota so far. It just makes absolutely no sense. Milic should have been getting minutes over her throughout. I understand Milic was foul heavy. I get that. Only one way to adjust to the W's style of foul calls is to play more. I just think it needs to be for Minnesota. It's a look in the mirror moment. For LA, it's okay. We need to start from the ground up. But how could it be the same dumpster fire that LA is when you have Cheryl Reeve as your GM and head coach? You know,
Yeah,
so
totally, 100%. They have leadership. That's the key difference
yeah,
right here is that LA tore it down and put their chips behind someone who was completely not proven in the league. Whereas Cheryl Reeve deserves plenty of the benefit of the doubt, and we can question what happened this offseason and say, well, Crystal Dangerfield has been instrumental in New York's midseason resurgence, and Lasia Clarenton was instrumental in Minnesota's turnaround last year. Why weren't they signed to start this season? You could ask those questions and still 100% unequivocally believe that, look, Reeve has this team in a way better spot moving forward than LA, which is essentially a blank slate without a draft pick, and it's going to take a minute for them to kind of build back up, which is a bummer because NECA might not have too many years left in her prime. Who's to say? Uh,
which I would say, as the person. First of all, we should note that Cheryl Reeve's contract is up. In the exit interview, she did say that she wants to be back. She doesn't feel the mission is done. So on and so forth. We'll discuss it with leadership, but she wants to be back and expects to be back. Basically, the same thing that NECA said. All that said, I would love to see Reeve and NECA together on a team. For those who don't know, Winsidr has been hosting WNBA watch parties using a cool new platform called Playback. We're able to watch all together, so there are no spoilers. We've been doing some fun giveaways. It's a lot of fun. It's just hanging out with your friends, watching the WNBA game, talking a little smack, goofing around. The link is getplayback.com/room/Winsidr. That's getplayback.com/room/Winsidr. We'll be going live for the first night of games for the playoffs, first round. We have a vote going on right now on Twitter, so you can help select which games we do. Honestly, we're probably going to end up doing both of them. We're going to be doing a lot more playoff games throughout these playoffs because, heck, why not? Owen, you're up first with our up team.
I just love how right into the ad read you just dropped the potential union of NECA and Coach Reeve, which then as the entire time you were reading about Playback, which is awesome, and you should join our playback rooms
You're
because
like, I have no idea what you're talking
incredibly
about.
fun. I would have loved to give my full attention to that ad read, but it just struck me. I'm like, oh my goodness, what you're just saying about playing
What, but
modern brand
right,
of basketball, NECA and Nafisa as the 4 and the 5 is like dynamite. That would be beautiful. Oh, I want to.
beautiful, a feel, but also like I feel. Here's my thing about NECA. I understand. I feel like NECA loyalty could end up hurting her, but the pairing, and I know they've had their beef in the past, but the pairing of those three, I just feel like that's just it's a mastermind. I think that propels them to. A lot of people talk about Bree Jones coming in Minnesota this offseason. But if I'm Reeve, I'm out in LA and Houston banging on the Agumake's door. But here's the one problem is then you got to deal with Shanae. But we'll talk about that later. Let's talk about our up teams.
I could go a whole nother hour on this. We're gonna go too long. My up team this week is a team that had no business making the playoffs this year. We've talked about them quite a bit, and every time we say, as I will once again say, free BG, bring BG home. It was a season for Phoenix in which basketball took a backseat because their star and just a truly beloved player in this league is locked up overseas and was not able to return to the states and play this season, and is still going through horrific times. And so our thoughts are continually with BG, and for Phoenix to play these games, never mind put together a run down the stretch that propelled them to the playoffs, is nothing short of remarkable. I think to back to the game on the day of Brittany's sentencing, in which Phoenix had to play, lost, and afterwards Skylar Diggins Smith, who was this team's MVP this year, and our thoughts are with Skylar too, who had to miss the final few games of the regular season for personal reasons. Really hope her mental health is okay. I can only imagine being in that situation and knowing Griner and just kind of having to deal with this on a day to day basis, the emotional toll it would take is inconceivable to me. I think back to her post game press conference after that game in which they lost, in which Skylar was incredibly raw and basically said, "You guys keep asking me about this. Nothing has changed. This is really, really difficult. The fact that we had to play tonight is frankly ridiculous." Those are my words, not her words. But that was kind of the sentiment of the thing, was like, I'm struggling here. We're all struggling. Basketball is not on the forefront of our minds right now because our friend is in this situation. And so I think that is kind of the main takeaway from this season, is that no one would have blamed them. No one would have batted an eye uh, if they had packed it up early and said, you know what, we're not going to make the playoffs. Boom, we're concerned with way more important matters. And the fact that they are being so supportive and there for BG, and somehow we're still able to perform on the basketball court is remarkable. It just seemed like every time that someone had to sit out, another person on this team stepped up, and I think that is kind of a beautiful thing, given the horrendous circumstances of this season for Phoenix. Diana Taurasi out for the year, kind of late in the season. Then Skylar steps away from the team. And people just stepped up the entire time. They were just there for each other, and that's beautiful. And I think it was ridiculous they had to play that night. I don't think basketball is, even a tenth of an 100th of a % as important as what is going on right now outside of basketball. And so to see Diamond DeShields, after what she's been through from a health standpoint, kind of come back late in the season and give this team a real boost. Shea Petty is someone who just, never gets enough credit and was just here for this team, a complete rock the entire way. Megan Gustafson, someone who has been passed over by many teams, has had trouble sticking in this league, and starts making shots for the team. Sophie Cunningham, someone who obviously is maybe a little bit controversial, but on the court really uh, really carried the team, down the stretch in a lot of ways, and her insurgence into the starting lineup really turned this team around and gave them a chance. So they didn't look amazing at the end of the season, because how could they? But they got 2 wins in their final 4 games, a huge victory over New York at home on August 6th, which no one expected them to win. They win by 14. And then on Friday, the second to last game of the season, a 12-point win over Dallas. They just took care of business, won just enough to get into the playoffs. And I just give the team, a lot of credit for kind of keeping it together when no one would have blamed them if they had packed it in.
You said everything. The only thing I'll add is there's something in the water in Phoenix, right? Like for years we said, "Oh, well, they're able to do this because it's Brittany Griner, free BG. Oh, they're able to do this because it's Diana Taurasi. Oh, they're able to do this because of Penny. Oh, they're able to do like the list goes on. At a certain point, there is something in the water. Sandy's not there. Diana's not there. BG's not there. Skylar's not there. Like they got Jenny Sims playing lights out basketball. I mean, props to this team. Scratch, claw, bite, whatever it is to find a way into the playoffs. And that's what they did. And you have to give the utmost respect. Look, I'm from Minnesota. So I always talked about one of the most remarkable things if Minnesota would have made the playoffs this year. I got to say, this is equally, if not more, remarkable to see this Phoenix Mercury team find a way. I mean, I counted them out many a times. I said from the beginning of the season that there's no way this could happen. I'm owning up to it. I was wrong. They made the playoffs. It's remarkable. It's impressive. My up team, and maybe, I'm a little bit of a hater of some of the players on this team also, but New York. I mean, similarly, look, at the end of the day, both these teams were on the playoff bubble. New York has had its ups and downs with injuries. Crystal Dangerfield, the midseason signing that, as you pointed out, kind of saved this year. Sabrina putting up ridiculous stats. Marine, Han, Natasha Howard having a little bit of a struggle of a season, but coming up big in a certain positions. I mean, like every player has kind of stepped in and not been great, but done what they needed to do. Now, Marine, greatness, Han, greatness, fine, but done things that they needed to do to help this team move forward. You can't not be impressed by New York and what they were able to do. I know it's been a lot of times of not being impressed by them. I know it's been a lot of times of throwing shade, a lot of times of, you know, plays that just make you like smack your hand against your head in frustration. But I mean, look, they make the playoffs for a second consecutive year. They're moving forward. I think right now, what I've seen from this team, and you watch this team a lot more, so maybe you disagree. Maybe I assume you're going to add much more insightful stuff than I. But I think what I've seen from this team is piece by piece, we see the players starting to play better and better and better individually, and slowly it's coming together as a team. Throughout the season, I've seen players do really remarkable things individually, but now I think it's starting to meld together. It's not a perfect puzzle piece yet, but they're starting to get it to fit.
I totally agree. I think it's a pretty incredible feat that this team made the playoffs. I think the main thing for me is health. Sabrina had not enjoyed a full season of health where she was at 100% and really looking herself in the professional level of the WNBA. This year that happened, we saw her take the leap that people had expected from her first 2 seasons in the league, and here New York is bearing the fruit of that, ascension, if you will. The fact that they made the playoffs missing Benijah Laney for the majority of the season is a real testament to how they filled out this roster and how those role players stepped up when they needed them to. I think that this was the case with New York. They were one of the league's, most Jekyll and Hyde type teams where, we were constantly talking about them because they were on the up and then they were on the down and the up and the down. Well, they started off the season incredibly poorly. And if you really look at their record after the 1-7 start or whatever it was, they had a winning record. And that's largely due to the play of the role players. Sure, Sabrina was an all-star. Sure, Natasha Howard, even if she didn't enjoy her best season, was an all-star. But, there were so many nights where three role players would step up just enough to get a win. Han Shu with clearly, an incredible improvement from when we saw her in the league last. Marine Johannes coming over here, and can we just talk about the one-legged three for a minute? Because goodness gracious, it was like I was just itching to see that replay. It took like 5 minutes for them to show the replay. I just couldn't think about anything else yesterday. Just ridiculous shot making, great passing. She was someone who comes over mid-season, gives this team a boost. Crystal Dangerfield, who won Rookie of the Year in Minnesota, was not brought back, as we mentioned earlier, somewhat inexplicably, at least to my outside eye with no intel, and made a huge impact. We talk about Crystal Dangerfield in her rookie season in the bubble as a major defensive liability. We're at the point in her career now where Crystal Dangerfield is being subbed in for defensive possessions. Dangerfield was someone who would come in and replace Marine at the end of a game just for a defensive possession because she's so strong and is so quick laterally, can stay in front of people. They didn't have Sammy Whitcomb's best season. They didn't have Rebecca Allen's best season. Uh, and yet still, they were able to cobble together enough wins to fight in the playoffs and really looked like the most dangerous team of those final, 4 or 5 teams that were making the playoffs. Once Dallas separated itself from the pack, you had, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Minnesota, Phoenix, and New York duking it out for 2 spots. And New York, I would say it's not a controversial statement to say that New York is the team of those 5 that opponents would want no business seeing in the first round. And it really is just a testament to all these role players really stepping up. Jocelyn Willoughby missed the majority of the season, came back and didn't really get any minutes. Dee Richards had injuries throughout the season, didn't really receive many minutes down the stretch. But Lainey comes back. She's able to contribute over the course of the final couple games. And now for the first time all season and the first time in years, this team's pretty healthy. And all they need to do is steal a game in Chicago, and they have a chance on their home floor to pull off what would be truly a remarkable upset. I don't think it's going to happen, but the fact that they're in this position really speaks to just how gritty the entire roster was here in a year where almost every time the injury report dropped, someone was on it.
Yeah, I think it was like a week ago, the first time there wasn't anybody on the New York injury report. It was just ridiculous. I echo everything you said, and I appreciate the boots on the ground information. We'll be back next week with WNBA Stocks with myself, Aria Schwartz, and Owen Pence. We check the market in the W. We discuss who's going up, who's going down, and who you should put money down on, right? Fine.
You already
Owen,
know.
you already know. We'll be back next week, y'all.